Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. On Tuesday this week, President Muhammadu Buhari signed an executive order changing the name of the Nigeria Prison Service to Nigeria Correctional Service. What is in a name, one may want to ask? Will a mere change in nomenclature be enough to address the age-old problems of that institution, which carries with it the onerous responsibility of ridding the society of lawbreakers, with a view to reforming and reintegrating them? We're going to take a more detailed look at this now with Ahmed Adetola-Kazeem, founder and executive director, Prisoners' Rights Advocacy Initiative, an NGO striving to make Nigerian prisons truly reformatory, while also ensuring that inmates break the cycle of poverty and crime through advocacy, legal defense, reformation, rehabilitation, and reintegration. Welcome to the program. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So what's in the name? Is the change of nomenclature enough, or there are other things you think that government will need to do?
It's definitely not enough, but it's a good start. So because when we hear prison, what it means is that the person is restricted. But corrections means that probably somebody who has committed a crime, and you want that person to change so that when he comes out of prison, he doesn't return. So the name is like a good start, but it's definitely not enough. The name without the necessary infrastructures would not lead to any progress. So beyond the change in name, there's a need to look at the infrastructure and also the manpower.
So how optimistic are you? This name change is 11 years in the making. Even earlier this year, President Buhari declined to give his assent to the bill because of some funding issues regarding the non-custodial sentences. But now that he's given his assent, does that indicate to you that all T's have been crossed and all I's have been dotted and that we're going to see changes now?
Well, I can't speak for government. I can only hope. I'm always very optimistic, so I don't try to doubt intentions. But we know that we have a perennial problem in Nigeria. Beyond the laws, many of our laws are more or less like toothless bulldogs. We have had the Nigerian Criminal Justice Act recently. But even at that, we are still crawling in implementation of a lot of sections in that particular law. So I really hope that this law would birth a new beginning for the prison side, because there's a lot of decay. When you look at the infrastructure, when you look at the corruption within the system, the name alone will not change all that. So there is need to build more prisons. For instance, we have 70% awaiting trial persons. They are detainees, they are not prisoners or, in that sense.
They're not convicted.
So they are not convicted yet. So there's a lot to be done. Beyond just changing name, there's need to build more prisons. There's need to refurbish the prisons. There's need to separate awaiting trial persons who are more or less just like detainees from those who have been convicted to see that change and ensure that the prison is correctional in line with the name.
Absolutely. And in terms of building more prisons, I recall last year when the United Kingdom was in talks with our government about building a new wing to Kirikiri in order to send some prisoners back. They were going to take £700,000 from the UK Security Fund in order to build this quote-unquote global standard prison. So it's not enough for us to just want to build more prisons, but we have to ensure that the standard of those prisons is also met on a global scale. Do you think Nigeria is capable of this? Because personally, I'm not that hopeful that we're ready to achieve that, but do you think that the government is actually going to put its foot forward on building global standard prisons? Because right now we're keeping our people like animals.
There is a lot to be done. I don't want to be pessimistic, but something tells me that things might not go right. But I really hope that they are listening, and I really hope that they'll prove us wrong. For instance, there's one of the prisons, the newest prison in Nigeria, is built in Uyo. It was built in 2011, and last year I was in that prison. It was in shambles. When you look at the structure, when you look at the structure, when you look at the facility, you will see that when it was built to standard, but it was thinking. Kirikiri Maximum Prison, and probably it has to do with management or something. It was already getting overcrowded. There were skill centers there which are not being optimized, and a lot of issues around it, even though it was just built 8 years ago. And sometimes we doubt this. There's a lot needs to be done. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I really hope that the government does what is right.
The bill that was signed into law by President Buhari, the Nigerian Correctional Services Act, is divided into two parts: the custodial part, the non-custodial part. Now, the custodial part, it will look like the normal thing, to keep people in prison, try to rehabilitate them. But the non-custodial part, dealing with parole, suspended sentences, family counseling, community service, and all of that. The responsibility is also for the prison service, the correctional services. Do you think that we have the warders that we have now, do they have the training? Do they have the competence? Do they have the skill set? And some of those issues under the non-custodial part are not yet provided for in our laws. What other laws do you think we need to amend or review to reflect the spirit of this new act?
And I think, starting from where you stopped, if we don't reform the police, we can't reform the prisons. So there's need for the government to actually sign the Police Reforms Act, and also be willing to take it to the next level. In terms of competence, I don't want to doubt the competence of our warders or the men and officers of the now correctional service, but there's a need to train them. A lot of retraining needs to go, and also they must look at their welfare. Because now there's a lot of corruption going on in that place. If you want to get into the prison, you have to pay money to see your relatives.
You have been there before?
Of course, I run prisoners as advocacy initiatives, so I go to many prisons. Okay. So to that extent, I know what is obtainable. For you to get to see people there, you need to pay. And even for many of the inmates to get to court, they need to pay. And the corruption starts from the top. So there's a need to look at the welfare of the officers so that at least they can earn living wages and not feed on the prisoners that they should be helping.
You're absolutely right. The whole criminal justice system relies on the judiciary, the police, and the prison system. That's correct. But what you have just said is pretty alarming. I'd never heard that before. So tell us more details about the problem that this act is seeking to cure. Because what I do know is the health risks that involve going to prison in Nigeria, the staggering rate of HIV/AIDS in our prisons, tuberculosis, drug use, that is, documented. But what are the other conditions that the prisoners are living in now?
The conditions, they are pathetic. Of course, everything starts from overcrowding. When you have various prisons, the amenities there is not enough to go around. When you talk of training, not all of them can. For instance, they have workshops. So the workshops can't engage more than 300 persons in a prison that has 3,000 persons. That's a problem. Also, the problem of, for instance, for the women, women who are nursing mothers, there's no provisions in the past laws. But this laws is trying to put a human face to life in prison. Also, in terms of persons with disability, the former law has no provision for persons with disability, but now there are provisions for it. And a lot of other provisions which I discussed the last time I came here. So I think that the Correctional Services Act is a step in the right direction, but there is more to be done in terms of the willingness of the government and those at the arms of government to make it work. So a lot of things needs to be done about that.
And one sector that really needs to be talked about as well, of course, is the judiciary. You said that the police and the prison service go hand in hand. The same way judicial reform and prison reform also go hand in hand.
Definitely.
So what is the starting point here? What is the starting point in terms of judicial reform? Because we cannot have the number of people that we have awaiting trial, and we let this go on and on without actually finding a probable solution. What do you pose as a solution to stop this heavy burden that the judiciary seems to have? Because really, we cannot be keeping people like this.
One of the things that needs to be done is employ more judges, definitely. And the laws are there. And most times our problem is not the lack of laws, but the willingness to make the laws work. We have the ACJA and you have the ACGL in almost all the states in Nigeria now. But the fact remains that we are not making them work. There are different sections in those laws that dovetails into the other. For instance, the ACJA provides for a database with the police. We don't have that. That is not working now. So if somebody commits a crime now, he can come out of prison.
Not even in Lagos State? I thought Lagos State was working, their database.
Yes, I think they are working on something, but it is not ready. You can still you find out I was in the prison sometime, and some people their data was being taken. Somebody said that he thanked God that it was.
Hold that thought. We need to take a short break. We'll be back. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still with Ahmed Adetola-Kazeem, founder and executive director of Prisoners' Rights Advocacy Initiative. So we're talking about the databases and the fact that they haven't really gotten up and running so far. I also wanted to talk to you about the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, which is such a great law on paper. So the databases are also referred to in that act to help identify first offenders and treat them differently, well, ostensibly, from repeat offenders so that they don't have to have a custodial sentence and what have you. But I want to ask you something. There's Section 34 of that act. I've always wondered. It provides for the chief magistrate of every jurisdiction to visit all the prisons in his jurisdiction or her jurisdiction every month to ensure that there's no overcrowding. Are you aware that that has ever been done?
I think it was done probably a few weeks ago in Abuja. Probably that is only one hour.
Wow. That's unfortunate. And then what about from Section 457, which deals with probation officers and the relationship between prisoner and probation officer? How far along are we with implementing that?
I've never had probation officer in Nigeria. I don't think it's existing.
And it's in the act.
So it's a lot of things needs to be done. So we just dole out acts, we dole out different names. We want to, we do a lot of things without the willingness to really do them. So I think the government must sit down and look at all the sections of this law and ensure that they work. Because we have a lot of LAGJA is there, it has not been running, correctional is good. But I really hope that the government is willing to really make it work and ensure that not just one part works, but all the part works. Because if the LAGJA alone works, we would have seen a lot of difference in the prison. The LAGJA was enacted to ensure that we don't have overcrowding in prison, yes, and we don't have delayed trials, but they are still very much there. It has not changed. I'm even sure that even before the LAGJA was passed, probably the number of persons in prison was 60-something thousand. Now we have over 70,000. That means it is worse. So if the hijack has not cured these problems, I really hope the correctional services will cure them.
Anyway, when you say AJA, you are referring to Administration of Criminal Justice Act, for the benefit of people who may not know the meaning of that acronym. But let me ask you, how optimistic are you about the likely implementation of this new act? Because we have so many laws in Nigeria. Yes, in terms of principle, all the principles will seem to be in place, all the objectives will seem to be in line with international conventions and standards. But at the end of the day, there will be no implementation. And what government is proposing, there's also a cost side to it, even if it is just changing the signage on vehicles, on the prisons, on stationery, and all of that. I hope somebody has thought about funding. And then there are some people who have recommended the privatization of our prisons as a way of maintaining standards, and government just setting those standards and supervising. Do you think that privatization will resolve some of these problems?
When I was in the US 2 years ago, the issue arose, and we noticed that many of the prisons in the US were privatized. I think it's against moral ethics. And it's also, it's like milking or fleecing the inmates. So they have to pay. A lot of them go out of prison and they are still owing. You understand? So who funds them? When you say privatize, that means somebody has to pay for the service outside the government. So who pays? So what you expect is that only the rich will survive the prison. You understand? So what's it called? The poor will have to slave. You understand? Because it's more or less like companies. It's more or less like running the corporations within the prison. It could be a soap factory. So, the guy just keep working. So I don't support privatization. The government has a duty to provide for the prisons. That is my view.
But what about the implementation side of the question? Do you think they will implement this?
I hope.
Given the culture that we
have seen. I hope. I don't want to live in the past. So I believe we'll have a vice president who is a professor of law, a senior advocate of Nigeria, and he has good intentions for this country. I believe the president equally has good intentions for this. So I won't want to be pessimistic. In fact, when I was doing my NYSC, I had a nickname during one of the classes. It was Optimist. So I don't want to be pessimistic about this law working. I really want to be I really hope that the government will get it right this time.
My concern is that there are people who shouldn't even be awaiting trial to begin with. People that are just thrown behind bars for all sorts of reasons. Maybe they had a riff-raff with a police officer that thought, you know what, I'm just going to bully you and show my own. Yeah. And that's another issue, because how do we then spot out these people who are sitting behind bars that they shouldn't even be behind because they don't even have any trial to await? That's another problem.
I think with these non-custodial measures, I think if you have probation officers, you have the non-custodial, and they are made to work. So of course you can just once you are arrested, so far you have like a means of livelihood, and probably your addresses can be traced. If you have proper database generally within the country, it will be difficult for anybody to run away. Do you understand? So I think a lot of things will be done. NIMC has that is National Identification Management. If all those one works, everything goes on in and so it's just beyond. That's why I said just changing prisons to correctional services is not enough. A lot of things needs to be done to get it right. So a lot of things. So in that guise, I think if you get these little things running, that will not be a problem.
Let me take you back to the question about optimism. I mean, I asked that question or advice because every government, since the Obasanjo government, has been talking about prison reform. The Obasanjo administration in 2001 even set up a presidential committee on prison reform. Working groups were set up. So the ideas are there in the books. But, no government has really taken this serious. What we hear sometimes is that to build one prison is very expensive because it's not your regular wall. It's not just the usual kind of building, and it's very costly. That's why I raised the issue about cost. At a time when, we're just managing and, the revenue stream for the country is very, uncertain. Now, that's why I asked the question about, whether you're optimistic that we'll be able to make progress on this issue under the Buhari administration. But you gave me a religious answer. But I wanted you to deal with the issues involved.
Well, one thing that needs to be done, because presently the prison is under the exclusive list in the Constitution. I think...
Under the Ministry of Interior.
Yes. I think responsibility must be shared. When you look at Lagos, for instance, most of the inmates in Lagos prisons are there for offenses under the state laws. So I think once the state starts, once the state government starts taking responsibility for offenders who get to prison by committing state offenses, they will take some of these things seriously. Because they find out that the states keep doling out laws every day. And these laws have imprisonment terms attached to them. So you find somebody crossing the road, he's in prison. You find somebody hawking on the street, he's in prison. So once the state knows that they'll be the ones to fend for these prisoners, then they will do the right thing by ensuring that not everybody gets there. Even though Lagos State has been one of the most progressive states in terms of community service and non-custodial sentencing, but there's still a lot to be done. For my calculations last year, a lot of people, thousands of people were in prison because of state offense, particularly through the activities of the Lagos Task Force, the mobile courts in Oshodi and Ogba. So I think one of the things that needs to be done to ensure that this burden on the federal government is reduced is to remove it from the exclusive list so that the states can also take charge and also be careful of how they just imprison people for minor offenses. So those are some of the things that should be done. And in terms of the cost, I know the government knew what they were going into, and I saw Senator Itainan talking about costs. He also mentioned the issue of funding, that the prisons have been, there will be increased funding for the prison to ensure that some of these things. I really hope that these words would not just be words, but follow with action. So because I can't say I'm pessimistic that it won't work. I don't want, because it's my space. So I really want it to work. We are doing our own little to ensure that we have an improvement in the prison systems, in the correctional service system, through our legal defense, through our rehabilitation. A few weeks ago, we had an engagement with some ex-inmates to see how they are framed and to see how they can, get their feet after they are being released, so that they don't, because a lot of people care about the get out of prison, but people don't care about the stay out. You understand?
You've just touched on my next two questions for you, so I'm going to ask them together.
Okay.
Why is this your space? Why are you drawn to prison advocacy? And I also want to talk to you about the rehabilitation and reintegration parts of your advocacy. How does that work in practical terms? What does happen to people who do come out of prison? What opportunities are there available for them?
You make me forget the questions.
Why are you drawn to advocacy and then rehabilitation and reintegration?
Well, why am I drawn to advocacy? I remember when I was in the university, I visited the prison for the first time. I visited the Devolution prison. So when I got there, I remember, it was a particular situation. We have never been in prison, so a lot of people who went were crying, from the experiences of the inmates, and we saw the living conditions. We couldn't stay there, we were covering our nose. And I remembered when I spoke to them, I promised to come back. When I was serving, I had the opportunity of doing some works in prison, which earned me the best youth corps member. And of course, I couldn't stop because I knew that I was contributing something very meaningful to people's life. People who have been rejected, people who are dejected, people who have been forgotten, people who are the lower rung of the society. And funniest thing is that in Nigeria, many people are in prison. I can't say most people, but many people are in prison for offenses they do not commit. So it makes it more imperative for somebody to speak for them. It makes it more imperative for somebody to look at this system and ensure that it really works. And those who have actually committed offenses are reformed, come out of prison, and become responsible persons. So that is the basis for doing what I do.
So what does that look like, the whole reintegration aspect of your work? How effective is that?
Well, it's very difficult, even for those who are not in prison, to survive in a country like Nigeria. So it's now more difficult for somebody who has passed through the walls of the prison. Because when you get there, there's an orientation. You understand? Somebody who has not committed an offense or who have committed a minor offense is turned into an hardened criminal because it's a system. Recently, I visited the prison, so we did a pre-release program for some convicts and some awaiting trial who were likely to be released by the XCG of Lagos. So I saw one of the guys who was very promising. He is a second-time offender. He had been convicted the first time for a drug offense. He was convicted the second time. So when I saw the way he was speaking very well. And he told me that he passed his GC while in prison. You understand? He spent 1 year, that he was released last December. And he passed his GC during his stay in prison. He kept a very beautiful journal. I think I mentioned it last time I came here. He kept a very beautiful journal about his life through prison. So I was interested in him. So when he was about to be released, it was the Kogi prison, I went to him. But while I was waiting for him, there was another person waiting for him. So when I asked him who that person was, he told me that if I had not come, he would have followed him, that the guy is a big drug dealer and they deal in cocaine. He was just selling Indian hemp. So he was going to move up, in quotes. He was going to start dealing in cocaine. And he said the guy was going to give him this cocaine on credit. And he was going to take it back to Jos, sell it, and return, and that is how it is for most of them. For many of them who don't have the support. So the first, I was reading somebody said, the most important period in the life of an ex-inmate is the first 24 hours. What do we do? Who is there for them to accept them? Some of them are just, it is easy for us to pontificate. Those of us who have never been there, they say, why should they? Why should they? Why should they? But somebody was locked down even for offenses he did not know for 10 years. I've done a case for somebody who was in prison for 13 years, 14 years, awaiting trial. You can imagine all his productive life or a large chunk of his life wasted in prison.
Sorry, awaiting trial for what as well, if we may ask?
Now, awaiting trial for murder, for armed robbery. Most times when you find...
No, I was talking about that specific case of 13, 14 years. What was he awaiting trial for?
Murder.
Okay.
Murder. So he was later released, and even the state was asked to pay some damages for the incarceration. So in essence, so it's a whole lot of issues. So when people go into that space, I think they need to be assisted. They need to, because there's a stigma. If you come out of prison, nobody knows the difference between a convict and awaiting trial persons. Even a convict deserves a second chance, not to talk of an awaiting trial person. I mean, when you ask many of them, say, I don't want them to see my face. And even though they were released, they were awaiting trial persons. They don't want to. So now we are trying to engage people and say there should be no stigma. We should stop stigmatizing those who have passed through the walls of prisons. Because anybody can be there.
And the truth is that...
We're
going to take a short break, and we'll be back to continue the conversation.